I've been doing a series of videos mostly on TikTok about magic and spirituality, and several conversations in my personal life led me to understand that I need to make a video kind of journaling the path from materialism to animism. And this is that video. Originally, I was going to do some fancy graphics and whatnot, but I'm kind of going through a hard time, but it still feels like it's important to do this, so you just get me talking to you. Um, I've studied religion my whole life. I started out in a very conservative Baptist church. I was in church 7 days a week. I went to church school, and there was a chapel service every day. So you got preached at Monday through Friday, and then there was Bible study on Wednesday night, and Sunday school, church, and then night church on Sunday. On top of that, I was usually in the choir or teaching Sunday school, and then on Saturday we went soul winning, and that's where a very annoying person knocks on your door on Saturday morning when you're just trying to fucking chill and tells you that God loves you so much that he's going to send you to hell. That was me for many years. So, church 7 days a week. And I went to Bible college to study theology. I remember that they would literally hold up books and say, in the pulpit during sermons, and say, do not read this book. And being a book lover and somewhat of a rebel, I would eventually start reading those books. To make a very long story very short, they kicked me out of college in a way where they could deny kicking me out. At the time, that was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and it led to a 6 year long depression, and I really didn't know I was depressed. I didn't have the language for that at the time. But I have come to understand that tragedies are often the best things that happen to us. I can't name a tragedy in my life that didn't eventually end up towards something good, and hopefully that applies to the one that I'm going through right now. But the universe has had my back so far. Now my worldview has been broken many times, and I believe that it should be prescribed by the doctor. I expect my paradigms to shift once a week. I never stopped learning about religion once I left the church, and now I think I'm in a unique position where I can see both sides. I have gone from ditto head Republican, conservative Christian to cancel cultural liberal to now fuck both of them. I don't really think that there's a political paradigm that I comfortably fit in nowadays. And so I think having lived in both of those worlds, I'm in a unique position to serve as kind of a bridge, a go-between. Because if I think about it, I can often understand where both sides are coming from. Our country is currently in this spiteful and petty stage, like a couple that hates each other. And that could either end in living the rest of your life miserable, in divorce, or in talking it out. I don't have any great hopes that we're going to talk it out, that we're going to choose a wiser path. But I feel bad if I don't try. I never really intended on sharing my journey, so I never really kept track of all the hundreds of books I've read. I never kept a journal or kept notes, and a lot of this isn't referenceable. It's spiritual things that happened to me. So I'm just going to try to reference very broad historical events that you can look up yourself, or well-known science and people that you can look up and research. If I throw a name out there, that means you can look those up and learn more for yourself. Some of it towards the end I can't, but I really, like in the days of fake news, I could say the most outrageous things and find a reference for it. So I really want to focus more on the story, the journey, than on references. So eventually, like soon, I want to turn this into a podcast where we talk about spiritual shit. But for right now, it's just me talking at you and trying to give you a summary of my thesis of existence. So materialism is the belief that atoms and molecules are all that there is. The only thing that exists is the screen that I am looking into and the screen that you are looking into at my ugly mug. Nothing else actually exists, just the things, just the physical things. There's no spirit, there's no God, there's no spirituality. This is the belief that you've been taught if you live in America, even if you grew up in church. And so if you're thinking, like, that's weird because America is in very many ways a Christian nation, but it's also this materialistic nation, and those ideas are in direct conflict with each other. Yes, absolutely, you're right. And that's part of the problem, is that America has these two. It's this public truth. The public truth that we put out there is that in God we trust. The private truth is materialism. Nothing matters but money. Nothing matters but things. These two truths are what America functions on, and they are in direct opposite conflict with each other. And that's why America seems like a very disorganized in thought, almost schizophrenic nation, because it is. It's the relevant worldview and the philosophy of American society and therefore much of the rest of the world. So a little bit of historical background here is that for, almost 1,000 years, the Catholic Church had a stranglehold on the world. They literally owned all knowledge, or at least they acted like they did. They pretended like that was true. You can't really own knowledge, but the Catholic Church certainly tried to. And that was used as the manipulation. Like today, we use money and materialism as manipulation. If you will get a good job, or you will get a loan, or whatever, if you fall into the right categories. And if you don't, then fuck off and be poor. That's the way the Catholic Church used knowledge. If your ideas, your thoughts, your words agree with the Catholic Church, you're allowed to live. They didn't promise you wealth. And if they don't, then off with your head or burn at the stake, which is, I imagine, a lot more horrible. Now, naturally, scientists didn't like this. The church didn't just murder religious heretics. It was anybody that didn't agree with the theology of the Catholic Church. And we all famously know about some scientist who, the name is escaping me because I didn't write it in my notes, who said that the Earth revolves around the sun and not the other way around, and you put to death. So it's not just theologians that were killed by the Catholic Church. So materialism isn't new, but it was thousands of years old actually. But it was kind of used as a tool to pry the hands of the Catholic Church off the throat of the scientific advancement and of learning in general. I mean, do you think that artists just wanted to paint the dicks of saints for the rest of their careers? Like everybody went out of this mess except for, obviously, the church. Now, many of these scientists themselves believed in God. It's not like the scientists were like, there is no God, therefore fuck the church, therefore let's start a philosophical rebellion so we can do what we want. It was more like, we want to study science. The Catholic Church isn't letting us. We need to weaken the power of the Catholic Church. So like atheism at first was not a part of this. Many, if not most, scientists still believed in God. But we started seeing this with philosophers like Hobbes and Descartes that started putting the bullets in the gun to start shooting the kneecaps out from the Catholic Church. But really, it was Darwin in the 1800s that gave them the silver bullet. And obviously, like, we're well into out of the dark ages and going into the Industrial Revolution at this point. But Darwin was like literally the nail in the coffin Um, Evolution gave us no need for God. If creation created itself, then we do not need a creator. So Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, and Nietzsche, I've always pronounced that wrong, Nietzsche declared that God was dead in 1882. That's only 23 years later. Now, you might be used to thoughts moving fast in the world in which we live with the internet and cell phones and all this stuff, but 200 years ago, that was an amazingly fast amount of time for this thought to reach a conclusion. During most of the history of the world, thoughts have moved very slowly. Um, the problem with this is that God was never really the enemy. The Catholic Church was the enemy, but the church basically owned the definition of the idea of God. And they did that for most of the world. And no doubt the Catholic Church needed to be taken down as far as like their political power. However, we threw out, the ghosts and the goblins and the gods with the bathwater. You know, we threw out the entire idea of spirituality. This idea, though, never really take hold everywhere, just basically in intellectual communities. Removing the Catholic Church, first of all, allowed thousands of other religions and spiritual movements to start that are still existing and starting to this day. Almost simultaneously with Darwin, the spiritualist movement started going. And this was like a precursor to the New Age movement and allowed a spirituality without a God, looking over your shoulder disapprovingly while you masturbate. So we see that almost at the same time, science is taking God away and spirituality is taking God away. Um, now, spiritualism didn't align itself with science because science had already, vehemently removed itself from spirituality. So it's like you can't come over here, get the fuck out of here with that shit. But it was kind of science-y. They used enough science language to sound science like science to people who didn't know science, if that makes sense. And we still see that going on to this day. So, but it wasn't science. It wasn't science, and it was a spirituality without God. So we have a science growing without a heart, and we have spirituality growing without a head. We have now removed one of the two primary ways of knowing from each other. Um, and that's pretty much put us in the position that we're in today. Most of us want to understand the universe. We want to know how things work through science, but we also feel spiritual moments, even if it's just like, damn, this meal is good, or oh my God, I love my kids or my partner, or this is a beautiful day. Those are spiritual moments. And we have tried through reductionism to materialism to say that's just a chemical reaction. The chemical reaction isn't causing the love. The chemical reaction is the vehicle of the feeling of love. It does not in any way mean that you are not having the experience of love or having a spiritual moment in your life. It's just these things. How is it supposed to happen? How is love supposed to exist if not as a chemical, electrical uh, system? I'm sorry, what's the word I'm trying to say? Movement through your mind, through your body. What do you think is going to happen? We figured out what the chemistry of love is. Okay, that doesn't mean that love doesn't exist. We just learned how it moves through our body and through our minds. So we have these spiritual moments. We want to understand how the universe works, but we have these parents that divorced a long time ago. They're still pretty shitty to each other, and they still act like if you choose one, then you're spitting on the other one. So you can't be spiritual and and have science. You can't have science and be spiritual. You're not allowed to, except for fuck that, right? But that's just what most people think. It's not actually that way. Science has actually been spooky for quite a long time now. Einstein. Now, you might think that Einstein was alive, in the 40s and the 50s. You watch the shows and the movies and you think, oh, that was just, around World War II. Einstein won the Nobel Prize 100 years ago. Okay, so this was 100 years ago that that Einstein was at the height of his career, and Einstein bah humbugged spooky movement at a distance, which is what that's what he called quantum entanglement. So the idea of quantum entanglement, which is magic, existed 100 years ago. So science has been spooky for a while now, and but I want to back up a little bit and talk about why the fight against materialism is important. Materialism may have saved us from the Dark Ages, but it was definitely a case of out of the frying pan and into the fire. Removing all spirituality from our approach to science resulted in ethics becoming a very nebulous thing. Now, I don't agree with the ethics that you should do good things because God is going to spank you if you don't. But I also don't agree with the ethics of it's all about, you know, get rich or die trying. That is also not no kind of ethics. Um, and I'm not talking about the ethics that philosophers talk about in college. I'm talking about the ethics that run our country, that run our lives. So remember, like, science is all science. It's not just chemistry and physics. We're talking about psychology, sociology, economics. So removing spirit from all of those fields of knowing, of knowledge, from all those equations, what that got us is what we have. We have out of control industrialization, heartless colonialism, mass consumerism, unchecked capitalism. We've turned our back on the spiritual lesson that loss is necessary, and loss is actually a good thing. We have to have loss. There's no life without death. There's no light without dark. I'm sorry, I was just reading a Wizard of Earthsea. A lot of wisdom there as in everywhere. Without God looking over our shoulder, we tossed out the parts of life that don't make us feel good. We thought, oh, we don't have to worry about a God spying on us while we jack off, so we don't have to worry about anything. And we just wanted to feel good. So we decided that unending growth is better for everybody. If I don't have a God, what do I want? I want it all. I want all these things that the Dark Ages never let me have. I want cars and houses and money, and right. So we got this toxic positivity view of spirituality or philosophy that is never-ending food, fun, and finances for everybody. Reaganism, right? And that's where we've got by kicking spirit out of science, out of philosophy, out of everything. And as a result, we're damaging the planet. We've wiped out entire tribes of plants, animals, and people. We've created more poverty and suffering than the Catholic Church ever did. More death, directly and indirectly. Um, we're not waiting for a post-apocalyptic world. We're living in Fallout. The video game. We are there already. This is a post-apocalypse story that we're living in. But most people in America are still pretty well off compared to most of the rest of the world. So we probably are not going to realize that we're in a post-apocalypse until we are, and we're not going to realize that capitalism is past its expiration date until we are physically living the reality that the rest of the world is. So never-ending growth is a cancer. Never-ending growth is unsustainable. Not in that it's going to destroy the environment and the world and we're all going to die, but as in it's an economic system of capitalism that pushes for unending growth is unsustainable. It will eventually collapse because it has to. Organically, internally, it's unsound. And therefore, like bridges all across the country, unless it is repaired, it is going to collapse. Which means hard times are coming. And I'm not trying to be a prophet here. I'm not saying this is going to happen tomorrow or next week or next year, but it will happen. It has to happen. It is inevitable. So an unsound spirituality is results in unsound systems. An unsound spirituality led us here, so we need a sound spirituality to get us through these hard times when they come. Well, they're already here, but harder times, and to help us create hopefully a better system on the other side of this. And part of this is giving up on the idea of a utopia. We're not here to get it right. We're here to learn. So we're just looking for better. And there's this idea in America that unless it's perfect, the Democrats will say, well, the Republicans actually say this a lot. Well, the Democrats' ideas also are not perfect, so why does it matter? Well, we're not looking for perfection. We're just trying to do better. Um, we think that to prepare for these hard times, like many iterations and psychological and spiritual journey that I've been on in my life, for a very short amount of time, I ran with the preppers. And, we think we need guns, food, blankets, water. I have all of those things. But what we really need, what are you going to need when you no longer have endless distractions, when you no longer have the internet, TV, YouTube, TikTok, whatever comes after, whatever it is, video games, good games on your phone, books. What are you going to have when you can no longer distract yourself? You need a healthy view of the world. You need a basic understanding of spirituality, of yourself, of ourselves. So now, if you're hearing this and you're like, "Oh, this is a soy boy. I'm a soy boy, socialist," and that this is all a bunch of liberal politics, it's not really, because liberals don't really talk about spirituality, and I'm not a liberal. But you're missing the point. Like, there's a political aspect to this because we've politicized everything. We've politicized a goddamn virus, for fuck's sake. But this is beyond politics. Politics isn't going to get us out of this mess. And it's not like the Republicans are going to win and everything's fine, or the Democrats are going to win and everything's fine. Neither that binary fight that we're in, if either side actually wins and the other side ceases to exist, either way we'll end up in a shitstorm because neither side is philosophically, spiritually sound. We'll end up bad either way. We're already in a bad situation. This is not a good or bad, me versus them, win lose kind of situation. This is, we all need to start talking to each other and creating a new reality, or we're all going to lose. This is as weird as it sounds. United we stand, together we stand. Divided we fall kind of situation, and we are definitely divided. So to change the thinking that has put us on the edge of this cliff, we need a new kind of thinking when we fall off the cliff, to help us land and to help us start rebuilding when we do land. We can choose to back away from the cliff, but I hope so, but I doubt it. And if I seem cynical, that's only because, I've lived half my life. I have this gray hair, so I have no great hopes of us choosing wisdom, but I hope we do. Before I really get to the meat of it, of animism and magic, there's still 3 blocks between you understanding and believing this, for most of you. Most of you are never going to run out of blocks, and that's fine. If you don't believe what I'm saying, you don't have to. The first block is that Christianity influences much of what you think. The 3 main monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. If you didn't grow up in church and you're not even aware of it, that makes it even more dangerous, because you have thought patterns that you don't even know you have. We are a Christian nation. We really always have been. I mean, it was Christianity that, it was this weird materialism / Christianity mix that allowed us to found this country, to destroy the natives, to have slavery that we use to build our infrastructure like that. We are very much a Christian nation, and that's not a compliment. Just to make that clear. Yeah, legally we might not be a Christian nation. A lot of liberals try to make that into a point, but culturally we definitely are, and we always have been. So what this results in is a lot of these thought forms in your head. When I say God, you probably picture an old white man sitting on a throne, floating in a cloud, getting pissed off because you smoked a joint or some shit. Whether or not you've spent a day in church, you probably have some version of that idea in your mind when I say God. And that's not what I mean when I say God. And I can throw out hundreds of words and concepts: morality, angels, prayer, uh, ceremony, on and on and on. And you're going to have this conception that is given to you from the Christian church. And that's what I was talking about earlier when I was saying that scientists really wanted to rebel against that, not against the actual, like, what in reality is God. We were rebelling against the Catholic Church, and we assumed, because if you assume that the Catholic Church is real, then their definition of God is the actual God. So there was a lot of assumption going on there. At the same time, we're trying to fight the church. We still kind of believe in the church because we will accept no other definition of God other than the Catholic Church's definition of God. Do you see how? Do you see the logical hole in that, right? And so when I say spirituality, you're going to think certain things. You're going to think that spiritual means moral, and that moral means not drinking, cussing, or fucking. And all of those things, like, just try to blank slate, just try to erase the definition of these spiritual words in your mind. We can try to create a whole new lexicon, a whole new dictionary, and use different words, but I don't like to do that because then we immediately are moving into an elitist world where I am using different words than what you understand. So just know that I'm trying to use the same words that you use every day, but I mean different things, and we're going to try to change those definitions. The second block is just like the first, and that's that Disney has created the idea in your head of what magic is. So Christianity has created the idea of what spirituality, what God is, and Disney or Hollywood has created this idea of what magic is. So if I say magic, you've been thinking this whole time that I'm talking about waving a wand around and turning, a pumpkin into a carriage, or having my dishes wash themselves. And I just washed my dishes earlier tonight. So if you know how to do that, please let me know because that would be a cool fucking thing to do. I hate doing dishes. But that's not magic. Magic is definitely a thing. It actually exists, but it is not having a car fly through the air or whatever, if you go from Harry Potter to uh, the Sword in the Stone. We've had over 100 years of Hollywood telling us what magic is, and that is not it. The third block between you and believing in magic and believing in animism is that magicians throughout the eons, the thousands of years, since the beginning of time, really, have spoken in symbols. Like Yoda and the Jedi world. And this is because symbols is the language of the universe. The universe speaks in symbols. We think that science is not symbols, that science is real knowledge, but it's not. Words are symbols, numbers are symbols. We process all information through words and numbers, and these are only symbols. So all of our thinking is only symbolic. Science is still symbolism. It is just a way for us to think that we understand the universe. It is no more and no less than the truth for this age and time, but it is still a symbolic understanding. We don't possess the mental faculties to actually understand the universe. Therefore, science is not, it's not over spirituality, it's not over philosophy. It is just one way of knowing. It should be respected and it should be listened to, but it does not and should not reign over all other ways of knowing. Because in reality, none of these ways of knowing actually exist. We've created these little boxes for our tiny little minds to try to understand the universe. Um, so we created the box of physics, we created the box of science, philosophy, magic, art, you know, cooking, music, all of hydrology, hydraulics, all of these little boxes, these little areas of knowledge. We invented those because we can only process little tiny fragments of information at a time. We have to slice the universe into little tiny slices to understand this little tiny slice, and then we think that the slice is the actual thing. And it's not. Those boxes don't exist. Those slices don't exist. We created those slices. We created those boxes. Therefore, what both, to paraphrase both Solomon and Aristotle, that understanding that you don't know shit is the beginning of wisdom. So you have to have a magical mind point of view of the universe. You kind of just have to let go of trying to understand, of trying to believe that you understand the universe. You don't, and you never will. So let me get to the main point. Aleister Crowley, probably the most famous magician of the last several hundred years, or at least currently, even though he's been dead for a very long time. He defined magic, and I'm paraphrasing, as the magician exerting their will upon the universe. The problem with that is, did I just exert my will upon the universe? Yes, I did. But I don't think, most people will say, well, that's not what we meant. Uh, we meant supernaturally. So other magicians amended that definition to say the magic is the will of the magician exerting their will upon the universe by supernatural means. The problem I have with that definition is the word supernatural. Um, the concept of supernatural had to come out of materialism. If there is no spirit, then we have this entire category of experiences that are not allowed to exist within this paradigm of materialism. So we created this rug called the supernatural, and we swept all of these unallowed experiences that disprove materialism under this rug so that we could ignore them. There is nothing supernatural. If it exists, it's natural. It happens in this world, in this universe. It's natural. My definition of magic is willingly participating in the co-creation of the universe. But that might be a little too much right now. So let's roll that back and say that for now that we're going to say magic is changing reality with your mind. Now, if that sounds like new thought, and new thought is a different way of saying like science of mind, positive thinking, which is all kind of the same things that use different phrases. That's because it is. These things are colonial attempts at sciencing up magic and making it palatable for a materialistic world. They also took the spirituality, they took the God, same thing that the spiritualist movement did. They took the spirit out of magic, and it's a honky white boy version of magic. Um, and it works up to a point, like positive thinking, like The Secret. It's like slow. I call it slow magic. So it works, and it works up to a point, but it definitely does not work as advertised. And I'll swing back around that. So science has already proven magic, over and over. So we're going to say that magic is changing the universe with your mind. So science has already proven this over and over and over again. When mystics like myself point out the fact that science has proven magic, scientists will vehemently deny it. But really, they're just playing a semantics game. They're arguing the definition of words, and their most frequent thing they do is to they will describe the same phenomenon with a different phrase or word, and say that it's a totally different thing. So let's say like magicians say that a part of a thing is the whole thing. That's how sympathetic magic works. If I have a little bit of your hair, effectively I have you, in my hands. And if that's a scary thought, then I'm not going to do anything to you, but on a lot, it's a lot. Some witches you would be in trouble. That's why people used to burn their hair instead of just throwing it in the trash. So scientists will like, oh, that's crazy. That's superstition. But then scientists tell us that once two particles come into contact with each other, they will always influence each other, no matter how far apart they are from each other. If they're literally from one end of the universe to the other, they will still influence each other. That's the spooky action at a distance that Einstein made fun of, but that is scientific fact now. And that's exactly what magicians have been saying for many thousands of years. And no scientist will say that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about that. We're talking about this. But remember, magicians use symbolic language. Even quantum mechanics, that's a symbol. It's not what's actually happening. Thinking that two particles are actually like going on a date with each other and then they will always fondly remember each other no matter where they are. And that's also not what's actually happening. This is pictures in our mind that we paint so that we can try to understand the universe. It's not the actual universe. It's just a different symbology. It's just a different way of understanding the exact same phenomenon. I respect Bill Nye. I grew up with him like a lot of you did. But his new show, I watched an episode where he ripped apart alternative medicine. Okay, all medicine started out as alternative medicine, Bill. I'm just going to say that right there. Okay, there was a rumor that elm bark helped with headaches, and that was just an old wives' tale at one point in time, and now we have aspirin. It was all at one point in time alternative medicine. Okay, but he ripped apart alternative medicine by, he gave the explanation that most scientists will. It's just the placebo effect. Well, just the placebo effect is just magic. That's the fuck what we're talking about. You thought that this was going to help you, so it did. You thought it was going to harm you, so it did. And scientists will say, but there's nothing actually in the pill. That's weird. It must be the power of the mind. That's magic. That's what we're fucking talking about. The power of the mind to change reality, to change your body, to change your health. That's some powerful fucking magic. It's the placebo effect. That's what we've been talking about. Science is, that's not magic. That's not A, that's B. It doesn't matter what the terms or the phrases that you use. The concepts are the same. And this is another, like, people will say words are important. No, what's important is definitions. What's important is concepts. What's important is that when I say something, that we both understand that the definition of that thing is the same. But think about when we say words are important. So that means I have to use the same word as somebody in a different culture and that speaks a different language, that lived in a different part of the world in a different era of time. It's not the words that are important. And we are slicing and dicing words until we get down to their subatomic particles nowadays. What is important is the ideas and the concepts, not the words themselves. What is important is the meaning behind the word. This word upsets you, and that word doesn't. So we'll change words. That's just a little thing about cancel culture. That was for free. That had nothing to do with what the fuck I'm talking about. So, scientists has told us perhaps the most magic thing is the observer effect. And this is, again, is a repeatable experiment. You can look this up on Google. If a particle of light goes through two slits in a piece of paper, the slit that it goes through is random. Okay? So you have two slits. Yeah, you can tell I wasn't prepared. You have two slits in a piece of paper. You have one particle of light. If all the scientists turn their back, sometimes it'll go this way and sometimes it'll go that way. It's pretty random. Some scientists even say it's going through both slits at the same time. But if the scientist is looking at it, it will observably change the results of the experiment. So that is telling us that the observer changes reality. That's what magicians have been saying this whole time. Consciousness basically collapses probabilities into a single probability. So if you start out your day, there's a million different ways things could go. By the end of the day, they only went one way. That's the collapsing of probabilities into one. By the time that it happened, just one thing happened, not a million, in this reality. And that is magic. Your observations, you are directly influencing that. Not just your choices, not just your conscious choices, but simply being aware of the choice influences the choice. Being aware of the universe influences the universe. Consciousness affects reality, and some scientists are now even saying that consciousness is reality, that the only thing that actually exists is consciousness, which that goes into the whole matrix. We're living in a virtual system, virtual, we're not in a hard drive somewhere, in that the universe actually exists in our minds, in our collective minds, and in our individual minds, because you actually only live in your mind. So you're not going to use magic to like physically fly through the air or shoot lightning bolts out of your fingertips like a Jedi, but you definitely can, and you already are using it to influence the collapsing of probabilities in your own life. To a lesser extent, you are influencing other people's lives, and they are to a lesser extent influencing your life, but you have the most direct control over your own life. The problem with that is that we brought materialism back into mysticism with new thought, with positive thinking. Okay, so some of you have been listening to me. You already had a thought chain. If I am influencing probabilities of my own life, and I can think my way into a great job, into a sexy car, into a nice house, a big titty goth girlfriend, and then I'll be happy because I'll have everything I want. And that's the flaw of new thought, and that's why I said it works up to a point, because that's materialism. You know, books like The Secret will promise things almost instantaneously, and even the most experienced and skilled and powerful magicians will tell you that magic is not a microwave. But you put magic is you put thoughts out into the universe, and that influences a lot of other math that's going on about the probabilities that are going to happen. But you're making your request, and a spell is just a concentrated thought. Really, a spell is just really working yourself up into a mental state and an emotional state to where you can concentrate on a thought like the head of a pin for a certain amount of time, and it's usually not very long, 20-30 minutes. And you were like uh, compressing your thoughts and sending them out over the internet. That's basically what a spell is. Um, but there's a lot of other influences going on. There's not just you. Like there's a lot of other. So if you say, for instance, because I'm going to get to this, this is a good point. I'll get to it now. I want to win the lottery. Well, a lot of other fucking people want to win the lottery too. If you say, I want a sexy car, I want, even you can even get specific and say, I want a Corvette, and I'm an old guy, so that's my thing. And Corvette's probably not your thing, but there's tens of thousands of Corvettes. I could even get specific and say, I want a 1977 Stingray edition Corvette. I'm sorry, anniversary edition Stingray Corvette. And I'm sure that there are several of those in the universe. And if I put that out there really intensely, the chances are pretty good that I'll get it. But if I say I want Joe's Corvette, well, that's a fucking problem, because Joe wants his Corvette too. And so now my intents and wishes, desires are directly in contact, in conflict with Joe's, and with Joe's wives or kids or friends or neighbors or whatever. And so, but if I just say I want a Corvette, well, then some Corvette out there will willingly give itself to me. So if we say I want money, it's not perhaps the best use of magic, but I've used it to get money. And if you need money, it's definitely a thing to do. Uh, but that's kind of like basics, you know. Meet your material needs so then you can work on the more important shit. But what we have been taught in our society is that the material things are the important shit. If you have money, if you have that Corvette, if you have that big titty goth girlfriend, you'll be happy. And a lot of rich people have already told us that's not really how it works. You can have everything that you want, all the material things that you think that you need, and still be miserable. So being happy is what makes you happy, um, not things. So you can use magic to get things, and you can use magic to be happy. But if you use magic to get things to be happy, that will not work, because that is not what makes you happy. And that's the danger of new thoughts, of things like The Secret. Um, Magic isn't supernatural. As I say all the time, for those few people who know me and listen to me rant about these things all the time, magic isn't magic. It is some kind of energy that I'm certain of. Magic could probably tell us what kind of energy if they would stop fucking about and believe in it or pretend like they did for a few minutes to do some experiments. Maybe it's one of the four energy types that we say that science says exists. Maybe it's electricity. Maybe it's the strong nuclear force. Maybe it's something completely different. I don't know. I'm not a fucking scientist. Hey, scientist, go out there and figure out what it is. But it is definitely some kind of energy, and as such, it follows the law of physics. Therefore, the threefold law is impossible. So, and for those of you who are not, have no idea what I'm talking about, there's this rule in certain pagan and magic communities that if you put something, a will, an intent, a spell, magic out into the universe, it comes back to you three times, threefold. And that's just another version of God looking over your shoulder as you masturbate. That's just another way of threatening you into behaving yourself and following an ethical code conducive with the rest of society, because physics tells us that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, not a threefold reaction. That's not a thing that happens. So happiness will make you happy. Your thoughts can make you happy. That's called cognitive behavioralism. That's yet one of the many, many ways that science has proven magic. But this thinking that things is going to make you happy, that's what gives us millionaires and billionaires, and capitalism has put us in the situation that we're in right now. The whole point, it's like the billionaires have figured out that they have not found happiness in the pot of gold, because the whole point of that story is that the happiness was in the rainbow, not in the pot at the end of the rainbow, because there is scientifically no end of the rainbow, because the rainbow is actually a circle, not an arc. It only looks like a bow or an arc because that's the part of it that you can see, but you don't see the whole thing. And as you change perspectives, you change understanding of the universe, and therefore your goals change. And that, in a story, is the point of what I'm trying to say. So Aleister Crowley and Damien Eccles and others are right. We are exerting our will upon the universe every moment, with every thought, with every emotion, with every action, and therefore we are always doing magic. You are always creating the older version of yourself. But what we mean by magic is that we mean that we're usually doing it intentionally, not accidentally. And therefore, my definition of magic, that we are intentionally participating in the co-creation of the universe. And the universe brings us to the second point that I'm trying to to prove, which is animism. As Gordon White has pointed out, animism is a pretty racist term that was invented by sociologists to scientists to make fun of indigenous thinking, to say, oh, they think that everything is alive, like little children. And nowadays we use it like we don't usually mean it insultingly when we say it. Animism means that the belief that everything is alive, everything has consciousness. And if that's pretty far out there, I think I just proved magic to you, so give me a chance. And even though we've been on a journey, we're getting close to the end. So we've already proven that trees have consciousness. This is something that you can look up, you can Google that. The United Kingdom just legally declared that octopus and squid are sentient. And so we've already lost the idea that consciousness, consciousness, awareness of ourselves is what makes humans different from other life forms. That's out the window. That's not true. Even crows, probably everything. Okay. So we could say, okay, we have this animal is conscious and this is animal is conscious. Now we need to make a list. We need an exhaustive list. We need to go through the list And scientists can spend the next 3, 4, 5,000 years trying to go through the list of everything that exists on this planet and checking the box, conscious or not conscious. But science actually kind of already short circuited that by proving, it hasn't actually been proven yet, but it's a pretty solid theory, that particles have consciousness. Well, a particle is everything. Everything is made out of consciousness. So if particles have consciousness, then everything has consciousness. And that brings me to my view of God, the universe, and everything. And from this point in time, I don't really have any more references. This is just my own spiritual journeys and talking to God and my ancestors and the spirits. So let's just say, in the beginning of time, at the beginning of the universe, there was one thing, and that one thing was God. And that one thing was literally one particle. Some of you already know where I'm going with this. And God came to the end of the thinking that it could do on its own. To learn, you have to experience. Well, to experience, you have to have something other than yourself. Well, God didn't have anything else. It was just God. So God had to create the universe out of itself. Therefore, all those old stories about God creating the world out of its own body, that's literally true. So we know from science that subatomic particles pop in and out of existence constantly. But they're not really popping in and out of existence because they can't. Wherever they are, they exist. We know there's different dimensions. Some people say there's 10, some people say there's 12, some people say there's 26. That's how little we know. We don't even know how many dimensions define our own universe. So the idea that we understand the universe is ridiculous. But we are three-dimensional creatures living on top of the fourth dimension, right? So let's say it's like living on top of time. We experience time in one dimension. So let's say that those sentient squid, like we are living three-dimensional space, depth, right? Height. Living on top of time. We're a boat floating in the ocean of time. But the squid is like a fourth dimensional creature that lives inside of time. It gets all of our three dimensions, but it has this whole other dimension to move around in. And its understanding of that dimension is far more than ours will ever be. And that squid lives on top of the fifth dimension, which we could see as the bottom of the universe. The bottom of the ocean. And so on and so on and so on. So there's at least 10 dimensions. We only fully understand 3 of them, and we are floating on the surface of the fourth. So these particles are not popping in and out of existence. They can't. They exist. They're just changing. They're popping in and out of our perception of their existence. So if you take that particle that exists at the beginning of the universe, and that particle wants to create things so that it can learn and grow. So it starts manipulating itself through time and space. From one perspective, that would look an awful lot like the Big Bang. From another perspective, that would look like creation. From another perspective, that would look like fish shit on the bottom of a pond. It's all about your perspective. So overdoing this, traveling the entire width and depth of the universe over and over and over again, and in and out of different dimensions and in and out of time, this one particle has created and will create and has already created everything. So therefore, the entire universe is literally God and is literally the same thing. Therefore, all matter is energy and all energy is matter. All particles are the God particle because all particles are the same particle. God made the universe. God made the universe out of itself, and God literally is the universe. When all experiences that are possible to experience have been experienced, then God will come together, contemplate, and do it again, And that might look like the Big Bang and the Big Collapse. The entire universe is just one breath of God. And it will happen over and over again. And always has and always will. Therefore, it's pointless to fight against God, to rebel against God, because you are God. I am God. Your pet is God. Certainly your cat is God. Your socks are God. Your phone that you're holding right now is God. Everything is consciousness. Everything is God, because literally everything is made out of the body of God. And God is actually just a single particle. Therefore, magic is real, because magic is only me communicating to the rest of myself what I want. Even if you look at other gods, those are still different aspects of ourselves, higher, lower. When I went gods, I meant small g. Spirits, angels, ghosts. One day I'll be you and you'll be me. One day you'll be a rock and I'll be a star. And then we'll change places. Well, how can that happen? Because our perception of time is linear. Time has actually already happened, and it is happening, and it has happened. We're the audience, the play, the playwright, the actors, and the critic all at the same time. We are God, but we're just tiny pieces of God. In our experience, our purpose is just to exist. God is just here to learn. You learn through experiencing, and you learn through pain. So our only job right now is just to live. Have experiences, observe them, feel them, learn from them, and grow. And then pass that data along to the rest of us, to the rest of the universe. A big problem that a lot of people have, that I have had at times in my life, is the problem of evil. But this even explains that. We only learn through pain. That might not be a popular way of thinking. It's certainly not a liberal one. But once you get old enough, you'll know, if you don't already. It is literally the only thing that changes us, that makes us better. It's not fun, but that's true. So whether in this experience of your life you're the abuser or the abused, you're learning. You're learning that either that doesn't feel good or that doesn't feel good. We have to do all these horrible things in order to grow wiser, in order to do better. As shitty as it is, there's no other way. That is not an excuse for evil. Because your spiritual health is literally the spiritual health of the universe. Your spiritual health is literally the spiritual health of God. So I'm not saying that we should dismiss all court cases because they had to happen for the universe to, well, no, punishment has to happen too. Consequences of your actions have to happen too. Because that is also pain, and that is also learning, and that is the only reason why we're here. So I love you. Be kind to yourself, and be kind to all the rest of yourself.